But so this is a story that I want to share with you. Some of you have read it in the book, and some of you have heard me talk about it. It's a wonderful story, uh, told by a dear member of our sangha many, many years ago. And she was at an event, and she met this wonderful guy. We'll call him Harry. And he told this story. He was like maybe 80 something years old at the time. And so the story was he was born and grew up in Germany in a wonderful time, right? In the early 30s, he was maybe 12 years old. That's probably not the place to be. And unfortunately, he was Jewish. That's definitely not the place to be, right? So he was Jewish, and he was growing up he was in maybe 12 years old, I can't remember, and so in Germany. Bad time. Maybe we're moving up to say like maybe 37. So anyway, everyone was getting the hell out of there as quick as they could go, right? I mean, if you were Jewish, you did not want to live in Germany. So people were immigrating as much as they could, and so unfortunately most countries had their quota that had already been met, and so they were not accepting more Jewish immigrants. I don't know if you know that, but what was the famous? There's a movie about people on a boat trying to get to Israel. Do you remember that? I don't remember it, the name of it. So anyway, Shanghai took Jews back then. You could get into Shanghai. So so this is what lots of people, they sold everything they had, right? They gave it to get, visas, passports to get out of Germany, and they took a boat to Shanghai. So here he is, I suppose, 12 years old, and Harry's in Shanghai. So eventually the story ends. He grows up and immigrates to Los Angeles. Gets married. I think he has a little business and is successful. And at the last part of his life, he goes around to temples and he gives lectures to young people, telling them what he's learned, his basic philosophy of life. So he said, so this is what he tells everybody. Here's what you do. I mean, not only if you're a Jew in Germany who go to Shanghai, but this might work for most of us. He said, you endure and you learn the language. You endure and you learn the language. Well, I mean, is there anything, now there's somebody who's called his life down to it, really. It's a pretty brilliant synopsis, isn't it? We endure and we learn the language. And so sometimes, and I said to this young man last night, I said, sometimes really all you can do is to just remember that right now, all I can do is endure. That's it. You endure. That gets you through sometimes. I mean, there are other things, obviously, that go along with that. You have to have some idea that there's some point to enduring. So that sort of brings me a little bit to the topic of right effort, because to some extent, when we'll talk about the Buddha divided into 4 categories, but to some extent, enduring is part of right effort. The other part, learning the language, like if you're German, you probably wouldn't do so well in Shanghai unless you learn Chinese. So I think that what we're doing is learning the language would be learning the Dharma. Learning the Eightfold Path is learning the language. Learning the meaning of right understanding, the meaning of right thought, the meaning of right speech, the meaning of right action, the meaning of right livelihood. And voila, we're to the meaning of right effort. That's learning the language. And I would like to suggest to you that there's a lot of us who would like to just sort of skip the language, just get to the good part. Let's learn to meditate, right? And unfortunately, it's not enough. I think that that's sort of something that I've struggled with myself for a long time. Coming to understand that, right effort, or right mindfulness, and right concentration, which are the last three steps of the Eightfold Path, are they're only the three steps of the Eightfold Path, right? It began with right understanding, or right view, as it's called. What is that? Well, I'm not going to go back into it. But as I said, it is learning the language. And I have, as I have gotten somewhat older, I have discovered, that learning the language is no matter what it is extraordinarily important. Learning your language. Lisa has her own language, and if I am not willing to learn that language, I can never really talk with her. Not really. If I don't learn Brad's language, we're going to go past each other, right? We all have a unique language. So, I mean, just starting at that most individual level, who is Nick, who is Janine, who is Victor, just at the most individual level, we are so lazy. People, I used to just hate that. I mean, people say, like with me, clients will come to me, and they'll say, I'm just so lazy. I say, oh, no, you're not. I mean, I would say that over and over, and they say, I'm just so, and of course, as a therapist, you have to give unconditional positive regard, which I just despise. But it actually flows naturally. I mean, it truly does as a therapist, right? You do that, right? And so people say, I'm just so lazy. That's why I'm not. Oh, no, you're not. You're not lazy. It's blah, blah. And so what we do is we reframe it, right? That's what you do as a therapist. You put it in a pretty little frame. Oh, Lord, I hope. Well, never mind. I've just lost the last client I had. So as I get towards the middle part of my life, I've decided, that we really are fundamentally lazy. We don't want to learn somebody else's language. I mean, you learn mine. I mean, I just want you to learn mine. The hell with your language. So, I mean, if we're really lazy about learning each other's code, if you want to put it that way, like you go to a hotel now and they have those little cards that slip in the door, and then the door magically opens. We're all have a code like that. And they're all unique. So, if you don't want that to be true, just say, well, so then never mind, so then we live in our own little cocoon. So if that's kind of like a fundamental issue that we've slowly developed, think about learning the language of Buddhism. Shall we talk about dependent origination for a while? Good Lord. So, learning the language is also going to be, I'm going to say, a part of right effort, right? It has to be. I mean, if you're not interested in, I do. I mean, we'll come on Sunday and sit, endure 40 minutes. But learning the language, well, I don't have time for that. I've got more important things to do. So, blah, blah, blah. So I just wanted to set this up a little bit by saying to you that really, if you're about enduring and learning the language, you've got it down, kids. You've got it down. To a very large extent. So I wanted to, I'm going to just kind of breeze through this. By the way, it's really interesting with the right effort. I am really exhausted, just really exhausted. And for various reasons, I mean, I have every right to be exhausted. So for me, that was kind of like an interesting, that was sort of like right effort involved no, not forgetting that, right? I mean, not sinking into it, not sinking into exhaustion, which I certainly would have done a few years ago, probably, but just sort of like that. So that was basically my meditation object for the last 40 minutes, was just sitting with that, and I mean, and it was fine. I never really slipped into any serious loss of energy, and being aware. I mean, right effort is, you might say, like the closest relative to right effort is energy. What's your energy like right this minute, David? You got any? So I mean, if you're interested in exploring right effort, as you sit or even as you go through the day, you certainly you begin with viriat. You begin with the energy. So I think perhaps the most famous story that I can think of that the Buddha taught, there are a number of them, but I love the one, and I've told you this. So there's this monk. He's kind of new. His name is Sona. And I like him because he was a musician before he shaved his head and threw away his lute, so to speak. So he joins the sangha, and he's gonna be enlightened. He's gonna do it. He's gonna go the whole 9 yards, or how many yards it is. He's gonna do it. So the story is, I mean, he was just relentless, and he did walking meditation in the forest, and they say you could see little splatters of blood on the leaves because he walked so long that he had sores on the soles of his feet, and he sat for 4 hours at a time. How many of us sit for 4 hours at a time? But I mean, this is someone who was after the big E, right? I mean, he was not playing around, and he found, I mean, if you find the Buddha and you're sitting with the Buddha, you've probably got a, sort of like a head start. So at a certain, he eventually got very discouraged because he was not experiencing enlightenment. He was basically experiencing sore feet, right? Extremely sore feet, and probably a sore back, and probably migraine, and he was very discouraged. I've been doing just what you're supposed to do, just like Greg says that thing. By the way, it's good to see you, Greg. Very nice to have you back. So the Buddha, of course, was magic, so apparently he even just saw this in his mind, that Sona was sitting over there near suicide. But more than likely, it's just that one of his disciples came to him and said, hey, you know what? We're about to lose somebody. There's somebody who's thinking about quitting and going back to his music career. So the Buddha goes over and he sits down by him and he says, Sona, he says, how you doing? Sona says, not so good. So he says, well, what's your problem? And the Sona tells him, I'm practicing 24/7. I sit and I walk and I sit and I walk and I don't eat, but just a little bit. And so the Buddha said, well, he said, I understand that you were a musician before you took the vows. And he said, yes, I was. And he said, so what? So you played the lute? And he said, yes. And he said, so if you tried to string the lute really, really tight, would that make a pretty sound? And Sona said, well, no, master, of course not. It was a very shrill sound. So then he said, oh, and if you didn't tune it tight enough so that it was just kind of flopping, what kind of a sound did that make? And so Sona said, well, it's a terrible sound. So he said, so what if you tuned it just right? Not too tight and not too loose. And then Sona said, that made a beautiful sound. So the Buddha didn't say this, what I'm going to say to you, but so we start off in the first metaphor that I'm going to give you two little metaphors. But the first one I would say is that when you sit, you're tuning yourself. That's what you're doing. You're tuning yourself. And it's not, and it is actually an image that is used, the Chinese talk about tuning the breath. Sitting is a form of self-tuning. And what's the instrument? What's the instrument you're working with? You know, it's like you're right. It's like, this is the loot, and it is also this, right? It's not just this. It's this. It's this. Whatever the hell this is, sitting is tuning it. And so this is what the Buddha said to Sona. He said, you know, he said, if you can relax in the presence, you know, if you can relax as you try, if you can do both simultaneously, you've got it knocked. Now that's exactly the Buddha's words. You've got it knocked. I'm serious. I mean, I know these things. So the story is, of course, that's, you know, so Sona went back to his practice, and probably it was not 24/7. And the story is that he relaxed, and he found that there was some grace and some ease in his practice. And so, we are told that that very shortly his mind opened, and he experienced the big E. Now, as a metaphor goes, or, you know, or an analogy, I get them confused. That's a wonderful description of right effort, isn't it? And as I said, the Goldilocks law, right? Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Right effort is this ability to do enough without striving. That's one way of putting it. That was a clever way of introducing this beautiful poem by Lao Tzu, or the Japanese one too. Do enough without striving, be living, not dying. From moment to moment, existence opens. Simply trust. Do not petals flutter down just like that. So, right effort is really, really, really hard to get, right? Because if you think about who we are in the West, right? I mean, hello, how many of us are not hit the ball and, right, push on, right? I mean, it's like it's driven into us since from when we're little. The people who are successful in the life that we all admire, right? They did it. They were relentless in their aspiration to achieve whatever they achieved. And so if you're going for an external goal, I kind of think that maybe that'll work. I don't really know, but I'm going to say, let's just pretend that maybe it'll work. Meaning that, like, whatever you're working on a project, and I look at some of you, and I know that some of your projects that you're working on, really, if you're sort of somewhat relentless and don't, obviously don't drive yourself insane. I mean, we achieve our goals. But what if this is the instrument? Right? What if, I mean, you can push a computer to some extent. I mean, it'll just as far, it'll go as fast as you can push it. But what about this? I mean, which automatically we have this part that says, I can't do this, or I don't want to do this, right? Either, the doubt of I'm not capable of doing this. So, I mean, we're dealing with something that is enormously complicated in terms of what I would call the unconscious. We sit with the unconscious with an agenda that is number one. We don't even know what the agenda is. So I guess I'm just saying to you that the reason why this is so amazingly subtle, and it's just worth almost like tasting. It's so subtle. In other words, it's captured by the Tibetan expression, hasten slowly. Right? How the hell do you hasten slowly? That's what we have to do. We have to hasten slowly. And another expression is the endeavorless endeavor. We have to try without trying. There's a wonderful, I think it's Wan Wu, but I can't remember right now. I don't remember, I think he said it, but he said, if you want to gain intimacy with the true intimacy, and what he's talking about that was, let's just say the intimacy with this. How many of you are intimate with this? Raise your hand if you're intimate with this. And I'm not talking about it. So he says if you want to gain this intimacy, you have to let go of it, of the desire for it. Right? So it's very subtle. The actual. I don't know how to even say it, but to hold this idea of right effort is anything but simple. And I would say to you, I find myself saying this a lot more lately, but it has to be felt rather than thought. It has to be felt. You have to feel it. Am I pushing too hard? Right? Or on the other side, am I, being a little bit lazy here? Right? So you can come and sit for 40 minutes and, like say, then 10 minutes later, I mean, how many of us have thought, well, okay, well, I can last till he brings the bell, for God's sakes. I can last. I can do it. Right? See, that's sort of like letting go of, that's sort of like going on the other side of right effort. I mean, one side of it is just pushing like hell, and the other side is just really just sort of like, almost without knowing it, you just sort of like let go of the intention of waking up. Because that's what we're doing. We're trying to wake up. How many people knew that? How many people knew that we're trying to wake up? Oh, well, there you go. Well, I just made that up. We're not trying to wake up. I just tricked you. We're trying to wake up. That's all we're trying to do, is wake up, for God's sakes. So I said that, so I'm going to, the one metaphor or an analogy is that right effort is kind of like the lever on the machine. The right effort is the way we tune this instrument. Right effort is the tuning. I mean, because it is the tuning is the way then we're going to develop mindfulness and concentration. Okay? And we are trying to do that, in case you didn't know it. We're trying to develop mindfulness and concentration. Both. So the other analogy that which is I kind of like, because I thought it up, and I still haven't gotten over the no self thing, unfortunately, is being a good gardener, tending to your garden. Now, I have a little porch. It's those of you who have been to my apartment, I've always said I wanted to build an Olympic-sized pool in it, but it's not any longer than from here to the Oregon over there. So it's very small. It's tiny. I mean, it's really tiny. It's like there to there. You couldn't do walking meditation on it. So I like it. I like to look out there, but it's just the port is so damn dirty. I mean, it gets so dirty on the bottom that then if I walk out of there for then I'm going to track dirt in, and so I look at it and I don't know how to deal with it, right? I hate the dirt, so I don't want to go out there. So I've got these poor little plants. They're just saying, water me, put some water right, because it's southern, so I mean it's facing the south or west, and so the sun is intense. So I've had a guest for the past week, and so when she was packing to leave, this is a female. I don't want to tell you. I mean, women are just quite different from men. Have you ever noticed that? Has anyone ever noticed that? I mean, when I pack, it just takes me like 15 minutes. And, when I get there, I open up the suitcase and say, well, it's like a surprise. I wonder what's in there. Maybe there's a toothbrush. Maybe. But, I mean, she was like hours and hours, right? And, I mean, and to unpack also. I mean, I looked in my bathroom. I have a guest bathroom. I looked in there and I thought, Oh my God, I never saw so much stuff in my life. I'm not making that up. Went through all my towels. So, it's just unbelievable. So, what am I going to do? She's just, spending all that time packing, so I'm going to drive her there. So I thought, well, I'll go out there and clean my porch. So I got out there and I got a bucket and I got a little kind of what do you call it, that rubber sponge mop. It was unbelievably dirty. It was beyond belief dirty. It was so dirty I didn't know what to do with it, right? I mean, and then to kind of come back in and drip and pour things in this thing. And I was thinking about right effort. And I thought, doing this like every 2 months, that's not right effort. I mean, I would just sort of like dance out there and water the flowers as fast as I can and get back in. But it was very interesting. So that will come up. So I love the idea of gardening as the way you think about right effort, gardening. And of course, it's the same as tuning. The garden that you are tending to is this. This is your garden. Or Cindy would prefer to say this. This is your garden, your heart, your mind. And the Buddha said there are four, I'm going to make this up, but he said there are 4 ways to tend to your garden. 4 ways. The first way to tend to your garden, and this is all, again, right effort, is the effort to avoid. The effort to avoid. So avoid what? What do you think you have to avoid in order to have a good practice? What do you need to avoid in order to come to Long Beach meditation or a Zen center? What do you need in your life, in your week? Are there things that maybe you need to be avoiding? Right? So I had the thought, if I were going to have a little garden, out in the country, the first thing I would do is put a little fence around it, probably, to keep the little critters out, right? To keep like the large little animals out. You're going to have some critters coming up too, but the effort to avoid would be. And so, if you want to think of that, even this about sitting, you can really you think of this in so many different ways, but certainly unskillful behavior. Does anybody have any unskillful behavior that interrupts your practice? Probably no one in this room, right? What about, oh God, I'll sit next week, but not this week. I'm too tired. Unskillful thoughts. How many people have ill will? Well, nobody in here. The effort to avoid would be recognizing all of those little things that creep up, like in a garden, right? Weeds that come up in your garden. The effort to avoid would be, as I said, building a fence around the garden. And what does that mean? Metaphorically, building a fence around your garden. Let's say you hang out with people who are really, really unskillful, right? Really, and you hang out with people who are, really unskillful. So oh, come on, have another drink. So you go out, to have a glass of wine, and you have friends who say, oh, come on, let's have more. That could be, it might be that you need to avoid that if you have any issues in that area. So, and I really mean it. I don't mean to be judging, but it might even be the effort to avoid people who are not good for you. I would bet that applies to a lot of people in this room. And obviously, the effort to avoid covers an enormous amount of territory. So, but we're just thinking about it in terms of this garden that we're trying to cultivate. Then you avoid those things that are your particular downfall. It could be a relationship. But you know the story of the hole, which I just love, right? So I walked down the street and fell in a hole, right? The next day I got up and walked down the street and fell in the same damn hole. Couldn't believe it. Third day I got up and thought, I'm not falling in that hole anymore. That's it for me. So you walked down the street and you fell in the hole. Even though you said you weren't going to fall in the hole, right? So you crawl out of the hole, you know, your elbow is all scarred and you've got blood, and you crawl home and you say, oh my God, what could that be? I mean, I decided not to, so I'm going to do it the fourth day, and I'm going to be incredibly careful. So you walk down the street, you see the hole, right? It could be whatever. It's your hole. You see the hole, and then you walk very carefully around the hole, and you fall in the same damn hole. This time, of course, you've got blood coming out of your ear. You probably lost one eye, and you're cursing, but that doesn't help right thought at all, does it? You're cursing, and you feel like, you know, like there's no, so you crawl home. So the fifth day you get up, and you're going down the street, and you take another path, right? That's the effort to avoid. The effort to avoid means you don't get to play around with your particular pit, whatever it is. You don't play around with it. That's the ego that says, let me try it again, coach. Let me in. I can do it this time, right? I mean, no, that's just the ego attached to its, you know, to its sense that it can do everything. The humility of saying, I can't do this. My friends can. I know many people who can do it. I can't do this, whatever it is. Now, I would suggest to you that every person in this room, with the exception of me, I would suggest to you that every person in this room has your own individual, private, and seductive hole that you can fall into. Have you ever wondered what it is? Someone that pulls you in a relationship, an attachment. Well, I mean, it's endless. It's endless. It could be something to do with your work. It's endless. And you won't get this if you just sort of think, well, that was just an interesting Dharma talk Victor gave. I really enjoyed that. He talked about the effort to avoid. Let me think about that someday. Right? So you can think about it next. I'll think about that in September. That is an example of that's your hole. That's the one that you fell in. Putting it off until tomorrow, right? Oh, I'll worry about that because that sounded like there was something about that really was interesting. I can't quite get what it was. But no, so I'm saying that this is meaningless unless you say, oh, this is my garden to tend, and so I need to really decide for myself, what is it that I don't avoid? What is the behavior? What is the pattern of my life that I absolutely do not avoid because I'm in love with the idea that I can get away with it? Well, that certainly it certainly fits me. The second thing is if you've got the little fence around it, and so you're no longer walking down that street, right? So you don't have that particular hole to fall in. Then the Buddha says, okay, so you've really got it going now, right? So you've got your garden and you're somewhat controlled and the critters are not getting in. So the next effort is the effort to overcome what has already arisen. Because, some things are going to come up, all right? So there are so that's sort of like, I would say, number one, I was thinking of weeds. The weeds that come up in the garden, if they come up, they really snuff out, the little tender shoots of the little flowers that you want to grow. You can't have them and weeds at the same time, so you do have to start kind of pulling the weeds out. So the effort to overcome, I'm not going to go wild about this because I want to get through this. I need to go home and rest. I'm making that up. One of the things that I thought about, and this is kind of like pretty anti psychology, it really is, but I'm going to say it anyway. You'll just have to tolerate it. So, most of us really, we come from the tradition of what I call psychologizing. And I'll tell you, no one likes it better than I. Really. I mean, and I don't mean that in any, I'm a therapist for God's sakes. I love to psychologize. I love to talk about the fact that there's an inner child. I mean, that's psychologizing the way I use it. Some people use that as a pejorative term, but never mind. But thinking symbolically. Okay, so a very interesting incident just happened, and to trigger this, it just came by email this morning. Okay, so you're sitting, and you're today. You're sitting today, and you start having some memory come up. Let's say a memory of something that happened to you when you were a little girl or a little boy, or in college. But let's say, I don't care what it is, pleasant memory, or but more than well, no, I would think pleasant's harder to get rid of than unpleasant. But okay, so something happens and you're thinking, okay, or let's say you're thinking about your lover, you're thinking about your sister, your brother, right? I mean, has anyone ever had a sit where you thought about someone in your life? Raise your hand if you. I mean, no one in this room has not had that. Okay, so if we're practicing right effort, and part of right effort is called waking up. I said that earlier, didn't I? Didn't I say earlier? That may not be the time to do psychology. Oh. Go to your therapist for that and pay him money. That may not be the time to do psychology. Now, I say this but as a therapist, I say this with some circumspection, because conversely, it may well be that psychological insight is really what you needed to have. So I mean, right, and so that, like, if you came to me and you said, I was sitting last Sunday and all of a sudden I had, like a memory or whatever. So I would say, great. But this is a kind of a rather subtle way to talk about the effort to overcome. Because, in other words, if the sit is about letting go, if that's what the sit is about, and isn't that what the sit is about? Isn't it about letting go? I mean, you remember what I said last week? I reminded you all of Joseph Goldstein's famous sentence, one of my favorite sentences in the context of meditation: nothing is worth thinking about. You can't beat that. Well, I'm going to try. I'm going to try to beat that before I pass away in this life. That's brilliant. It's brilliant. In the context of meditation, nothing is worth thinking about. Now, I mean, I'm going to tell you that, I don't mean to be unkind to anybody, including myself, but I would say that for every person sitting in here, that's almost like, what? Give me a break. I mean, really, it's like, nothing is worth thinking about. What about my life? What about my happiness? What about my relationship with June or Bill or Joe or my children? Or, what about my child is sick? There's a good one. Does anyone, hello, my child is really sick. So I've come to meditation, and of course that's where your mind goes. So what do you do with that? Right. Nothing is worth thinking about. That's almost horrible, isn't it? To say, well, no, you've got to think about your child. So I'm just simply saying that would be the effort to overcome. We could take it. I really gave you. This is the hard knot, right? We could take it down to the effort to overcome an unskillful thought with a skillful thought, right? You substitute, ill will with loving kindness, and excuse me for doing this, and blah blah blah. But but I mean that's sort of like that's another level, and it's not a wrong level in terms of right effort. I mean, and this is really what the Buddha would mostly be talking about. The Buddha did not talk about letting go of psychological thoughts because they didn't do that back then. But they'd be talking about right substituting right an unskillful thought for that's an effort to overcome, obviously, right? Ill will. So you're sitting with ill will, the effort to overcome that. But I'm just suggesting to you that to overcome this tendency that we have to dip into the pleasure of thinking. What I call it is like, you're picking strawberries, and rather than putting in a basket, you eat them. That's what we do, kids. It's just too juicy. I'm sorry, right? There it is, or there. No. Instead, you eat it. That's not, being able to let go of this juicy pleasure. I mean, the truth is, we all have a little masochistic tendency. Well, except if you're a sadist. But okay, so I mean, we can really sort of get pleasure out of, oh God, something really bad. Oh. We can get pleasure out of that. So it's incredibly seductive. Yes? Does anyone think thinking is not incredibly seductive? Because raise your hand if no, you wouldn't dare, because I'd pick on you. Okay, so I call that enduring. That's the enduring part of Harry the Shanghai Jew. Right. Enduring. The effort to avoid, right, because I mean there's only one thing you're trying to avoid, and that's unskillful stuff that will prevent you from practicing, and the effort to overcome, which I think that the ultimate effort to overcome is really to overcome this kind of continual tendency to nurture whatever your story is. I mean, there's not hello, what's your story? What's your story? What's my story? To overcome that, not to get rid of it, has nothing to do with getting rid of it. Has nothing to do with getting rid of, like, staying on that concern about someone you love. It has nothing to do with that. It's just in the context of meditation, nothing is worth thinking about, because we're trying to learn how to let go of thought here. We're not trying to get rid of it. We're not trying to destroy it. We're just simply trying to learn how to be in the moment. And if you are in the moment without the muck of thought, your brain automatically starts to clean out. What did I just say? Oh my God. It's amazing. If your mind, if you have a sweet spot, if your mind suddenly has a moment of clarity, it's not a dead spot. It's a moment of cleaning. It's cleaning. So learning the language, what I would call, would be going to the last two, and so that would be the effort to. We're back to our garden, right? So now we've weeded it. Right, we've got a fence to keep all the critters out. We've weeded it, and so now we're going to do what? We're going to develop. We're going to nurture the garden. You're going to pour some water on the plants. We're going to get it set so that there's sunlight coming in. There maybe you're going to go to the store and buy some Vigro or whatever it's called, put a little Vigro on it. Maybe that's a long time ago. I don't know. Plant food. So what would that be like in your practice? What would be nurturing, developing your garden? Developing the seeds in your garden. So what about coming to meditation? What about that? Do you think that could be part of developing the garden? Oh, no, not that. What about listening to a CD of a Dharma talk? What about, oh, God forbid, reading? $15, kid. $15 will give you a discount. Anybody? Okay, reading Dharma, whatever. But all of these activities that are related to practice, that's developing. That's what developing is, developing your practice. And so we would say, if you think about Victor and his porch, which is kind of like just pathetic, it wouldn't be like doing it every other month. A lot of dirt accumulates in 2 months. And let me tell you, I can tell you all about it just from Friday. It has something to do with constancy, doesn't it? Right? I mean, any garden that is not tended to will immediately start going to pot. It's amazing. I really consider that. I find it almost insulting. I really do. I don't. I resent it. I mean, but it's really true. In other words, with U Pandita talks about the mother hen sitting on an egg. It's the constancy that makes it work. The egg's got to be at a constant temperature. She just, she doesn't have to understand a thing about biology, does she? And most chickens don't, by the way. Most chickens are fairly stupid. I don't really mean to be unkind, but they aren't very intelligent. But they've got enough sense to know how to sit on an egg. So let's say the mother hen says, well, I'm really bored. This is boring. I'd rather read a book, a novel, but not Dharma. But so she gets off the egg and goes over and reads, some novel. What's going to happen to the egg? We're not talking about a chick, are we? Coming forth. So, the effort to develop involves constancy. I mean, think about that. Constancy. A willingness to stay attending to the egg. What is the egg that you are working with? Or the fetus that you're feeding? Wow. In the garden, in your garden, there are 7 seeds. And the Buddha called them the 7 factors of enlightenment. They're in every single mind. You were born with it. If you don't tend to the garden, they're not going to sprout, and they're certainly not going to flower. So the 7 factors of awakening, it's wonderful. It's just wonderful. First one, the first one's mindfulness, for God's sakes, for heaven's sakes. The last one is equanimity. So that's the garden that you're tending to. It's only got 7 flowers. Not much of a garden, right? Just 7 flowers. And that's the garden that we're tending to, and it is the constancy only that will result in a garden growing, the flowers growing up and blooming. That's the effort to develop. And the 4th right effort, and so the 4th right effort is, it's kind of obvious. I won't tell you that one. Okay, so that's the end of the talk. No? The effort to maintain. Right? It's pretty obvious. You can't just say, it's like me on Friday, well, I got that thing all clean. All right. But the effort to maintain, and the effort to maintain is sort of like, in other words, if you've got the practice going and you are nurturing the garden, the effort to maintain is, what about the Buddha said, the Ananda asked him, our spiritual friends, I'm just paraphrasing this, but our spiritual friends, an important part of the practice. And he said, no, they're everything. They're everything. So the idea of a sangha, of spiritual friends that support one another, would be part of maintaining the practice. Yeah. If you are fortunate enough to find a teacher that you trust, that you can trust, that's extremely important. We're so programmed in the West. We're so programmed to be an island. right, unto ourselves. Right? We are. It's just amazing. And the the it's very difficult to really trust someone, a teacher, and to somewhat give yourself over. And again, personally, I'm always drawn. There's like many great Buddhist teachers who didn't have a teacher. One of my favorites is Chinul, who's Korean. So in other words, it's not just that you can do it, but if you don't have a physical teacher, you have to have a teacher, right? And so the teacher would be the inner guru. But I mean, and again, that again, that just goes back to the whole thing of study, the Dharma, listening to talks, attending and sitting and sitting and sitting and sitting, and not sitting just on Sunday, and letting that be your teacher. The effort to avoid, the effort to overcome, the effort to develop, and the effort to maintain. Those are the four right endeavors, the four right efforts. And you ain't going to get there if you don't do it, if you're not working all four. I'm not either. We're not. They are all required. As I kind of think, and as I said, in my little mind, that sort of is, it is enduring and learning the language. And so what I would really urge you to do is to take these four endeavors and just kind of taste them, as you're driving home to Orange County. But I mean, just taste them. Taste that in your life, because you see that's taking these words. They're just words, right? That's taking these words and then bring them into your own unique code, your language. This is my language, right? I mean, the garden is my image, but that's my language. But to put it into your language and to say, so what is it that I need to avoid? What is it that I need to overcome? What is it that I can develop? And what is it that I can maintain?